Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue sur Blabla Katie. My name is Katie and today we're going to blah blah about how to be more confident when speaking French. So essentially what I'm trying to get across in this video is don't be afraid to speak French. This is a lot easier said than done, and this is coming from someone who still often has fears and social anxieties when speaking French. So we're just gonna dive right in, and the first thing that I wanna talk about is actually something that I learned about on TikTok. It is somewhere lost in the depths of all of the videos that I've liked on that app, but there was a video where there was a woman talking about like the 7-question method, or it was called something like that, where if there's something bothering you, then you need to ask yourself at least 7 different times why, to figure out what the actual root of the issue is. So I wanna show you an example of this 7-question method, but specifically with the anxieties surrounding speaking French or any other foreign language really. And we're going to take myself as an example because, as I said, this is something I still struggle with from time to time. So if I were to ask myself, Katie, why are you afraid of speaking French? I would immediately have to qualify that statement and say, I'm afraid of speaking French sometimes with native French speakers. So why am I afraid of doing that? Because I have social anxiety. So at this point, while I have answered the initial why question, it's not really the root of the problem. I can't just tell myself, well, stop having social anxiety. That would not be helpful. So instead, I now ask myself, okay, so why do you have social anxiety when you speak French with native French speakers? And the answer to that question is, I'm afraid that I'm going to make a mistake or mess up in front of these native speakers. So once again, still not deep enough. I can't really just say, well, don't make mistakes because I'm still gonna make mistakes. So by now you should know that the next question is just, why are you afraid of making mistakes in front of native French speakers? And the answer to that question is, I don't want them to think that I can't speak French. So obviously I didn't get through all 7 why questions, but it's right here that I really wanna focus on. So my fear does not really come from social anxiety. The social anxiety is a symptom. The actual fear comes from other people, namely native French speakers, thinking that I can't speak French or that I can't speak it well. So the root of the problem is not me not knowing French, it's not the errors that I make in French, it's actually the fact that I care about what other people think, which is totally normal. But now that I know that that is the crux of the issue, I can then work on reframing my own mindset to make sure that I care less about what other people think. And with that message, let's get into certain ways that you can reframe your mind and certain actions you can take so that you can become more confident speaking French. So the first thing that I want to stress is that perfection is in no way a requirement for confidence. You do not have to be perfect in the language before you can fully feel confident in it. And this is so important because in the past, I definitely have had thoughts where I'm like, okay, if I can just master this one grammatical concept, then I will be confident in French. And I've heard other people say this too, where they need to hit a certain goal before they really think they can unlock that confidence level. But this is completely bogus. You can be confident at every single stage of your learning French level, but to do that, you really need to separate confidence from perfection because the two are not mutually exclusive, they are not codependent. And to kind of go along with this, a way that you can feel confident even when you're making mistakes is to reformulate the way you are looking at your errors. So instead of thinking that every mistake you make is just another reason as to why you're not perfect in French and therefore why you can't be confident when speaking French, instead, you want to think about every mistake being a learning opportunity because it's really just an opportunity to get better. The most important thing here is progress, not perfection, but progress. And what's so amazing about progress and putting an emphasis on just getting better as opposed to doing it right all the time is that your progress is going to be relative to you and you alone. You're the only person who knows how far you've come and how long you've been learning French and how long you've been trying to speak French. And the only thing that matters is trying to get better with each passing day. That's it. I think that this really does take off a lot of pressure because all of a sudden you don't have to be saying everything correctly and using the right prepositions. It's really just a matter of, did I do better today than yesterday? So those tips are really more of how to reframe your mind. And the next things I'm going to talk about are still somewhat mental, but they also have some concrete actions that you can take as well. So as you are trying to rewire your mind to really focus on progress as opposed to perfection, you'll really want to start putting in the work to become your biggest fan as opposed to your biggest critic. It is very easy to be super hard on yourself, and something that helps me when I feel like I'm being very, very critical of myself is to think about my students. Because I've been teaching French for a couple of years, I've also also taught English in the past. And what I do is I think about the way that I would respond to their errors, and it is very different from how I respond to my own mistakes. So when I make a mistake, for example, the first thing that I want to do is apologize to whoever it is I'm talking to. Whereas with my students, if they ever go to apologize, the first thing I'm saying is, there's nothing to be sorry for. This is a good thing. This is you learning. And so I think this is really helpful for me to reframe how I should be speaking to myself and how I should be thinking about the way that I respond to myself when I make mistakes. If you're not a teacher, so if you can't relate and you don't have students, you can think about if your friend were to learn a language or to learn some sort of skill, and if they were to mess up, you would never say something to make that worse. You would try to encourage them. So try to treat yourself with the same kindness that you would treat one of your friends or one of your students. You should also get into the habit of tracking your progress because, like we said before, the emphasis really is on getting better. It can be hard to see the progress. For example, whenever I'm speaking French, I will definitely try to record it. I have a bunch of different recordings of me speaking French. And once every few weeks or every month, I'll go and listen to the most recent recording and one of my older ones to really show myself how much I have improved. And finally, under the category of becoming your biggest fan as opposed to your worst critic, you should combat that worst critic by verbalizing the opposite to yourself. For example, despite the fact that I've been learning French for 15 years and that I've taught it and that I've lived in France several times, there are sometimes these little bubbles of self-doubt that come up that make me question if I can actually speak French. And obviously I can. But again, we are our own worst critics. So when that happens, I go to the mirror and I look myself in the eyes and I say, you speak French. Or I record myself saying, you speak French, and I watch it until I believe it. This is very strange at first, don't get me wrong. It took me a little bit of time before I could get used to this, but it really is helpful and it is powerful saying these words out loud. So this is something else I would recommend in order to really change your mindset to become more encouraging as opposed to critical. Next, and this is something that really hits home with me, you need to learn how to own your accent. If you are like me, you have an accent when you speak French, and you will likely always have an accent when you speak French. I didn't start speaking this language until I was 20, so there's really only so much that I can do to sound exactly like a native French speaker. And for the longest time, I thought that this was an issue. I thought that my goal with learning French had to be sound like a native speaker so that people can't tell that you're a foreigner. And that really was a very, very unrealistic goal of mine for the longest time. But the problem with this goal is that, similar to what I was talking about earlier, it makes it sound like I'm not allowing myself to speak French until I get to that imaginary point of perfection. So once again, I tried to imagine a scenario in which there is somebody else in my position. So if I were speaking to a foreigner whose native language is not English, if they had an accent, as long as I could understand them, I probably wouldn't even think about the accent because I would actually be paying attention to the conversation. And when I think about this flipped situation in my head, it really makes me realize it doesn't matter that I have an accent in French. The most important thing is really just being understood. And once again, this is something that takes off a lot of pressure off of my shoulders because I realize, oh, I don't have to spend so much time trying to achieve a goal that is realistically impossible for me. So do not sweat the accent, just worry about being understood. My next piece of advice is actually a little more concrete than just changing your mindset, but if you know that you're going to be in a situation where you are speaking French, and if you know that you have stage fright or social anxiety, or you're likely for some reason going to forget what it is that you want to say, I definitely recommend prepping your conversation first. So looking up certain vocabulary words that you might want to use, writing out sentences that you know that you want to say, and bringing that piece of paper with you so that if you forget something, you can just read off of the paper. This obviously will depend on context. This is what I would do in France, for example, when I had to go to the pharmacist and ask for medicine, and I had to go to the grocery store and couldn't remember certain words for different ingredients. It might be a little awkward. Gotta do what you gotta do. That's actually a perfect segue into the next tip, which is getting out of your comfort zone as many times as possible. If you think about it like riding a bike, the first few times that you rode a bike, it was completely foreign, it was very awkward, a little scary, but eventually it became easier and easier, and now you probably ride a bike without even thinking about it. The same thing goes for literally everything else. So in my case, the more and more I speak to native French speakers, the less and less social anxiety I'm likely going to feel because I'm going to be way more accustomed to listening to French and to speaking French and to the different cultural cues. So wherever the boundaries of your comfort zone stops, try to get out of that as much as you possibly can. And when you do go out of your comfort zone, make sure that you are being kind to yourself. For example, again, in my case, if I get out of my comfort zone and have a French conversation with a native speaker, instead of walking away from that conversation being embarrassed that I messed up, I don't know, an article, instead of focusing again on the mistakes, I can instead celebrate not only the small wins. So for example, oh, I didn't have to repeat myself, but you can just celebrate the fact of having gotten out of your comfort zone in the first place. And my final piece of advice for getting over the anxiety or the fear of speaking French is finding a friend, or even better, a community of people who you can rely on when you are feeling anxious, who can kind of take you out of that state and put things into perspective. For example, I actually was very hesitant to even start this YouTube channel and to start my TikTok because I had a very irrational fear that I actually don't speak French. I went to one of my best friends who I always go to when I'm feeling this sort of imposter syndrome, and she always gives me a pep talk. And what she said was, you have been studying French for this long, you literally taught French at an Ivy League, you have lived in France, you just got a job in France, you speak French, and you speak it well. And these are all things that I rationally know. But again, because sometimes we are our own worst critics, it's hard to actually believe them. But when I hear one of my best friends saying these things, it's kind of another vote of confidence, and it's a way to really snap me out of that imposter syndrome. If you unfortunately feel like you don't have anybody that you can go to who will encourage you and take away some of that anxiety, please feel free to reach out to me, whether that is in the comments here, in a comment on my TikTok, on Insta, whatever it is. I will do my best to remind you that you also indeed speak French, that you deserve to feel confident doing so. So those are all of my tips to sort of reframe your mind and the different little actions that you can take in order to feel more confident speaking French. If there's anything else that you would add to this, please feel free to put them in the comments below. If you got any value out of this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. À la prochaine!